Hi, everybody. Welcome to another edition of In a Heartbeat. I'm your host, John Clor. And, spring has sprung here in the Grosse Pointes and here at WMTV. And a lot of people, when they think of spring, what do they think of? They think of, well, for me, it's taxes. But for other people, it could be the flowers. But there are many people that think about our environment, and it's the time of Earth Day. And as you know, this is a health and wellness show, and the green movement, which is why I'm wearing green today for you, is a big issue for everyone, and how we can stay, not just our own personal lives stay healthy, but that Mother Earth stays healthy. So as you all know, when you see me on the air, it usually means we're going to somehow get around to transportation. And of course, when I talk about Earth Day, I'm going to be talking about transportation and how the alternate fuel world and how we move ourselves around in the future makes a great topic. And I think if you guys are interested in all this kind of new talk you've been hearing on TV and radio and about all the ways we can move ourselves in the future, you're going to love this show. Of course, who else are we going to talk to when we have something that cool other than the guy who runs thevirtualdriver.com. You've seen him before, Chris Sawyer. Chris,
hi, John.
Thanks for joining us again. I think it's a great topic. I think it's something that's on everybody's mind when they think about, you know what, they're really getting tired of popping $4, $5, $6. If you're in Europe, what is it, $9.50 a gallon?
$10.25 in England.
Yikes! That's when you start thinking about maybe the alternative fuel discussion, and I think today we can really kind of take it right to the top four. Let's start right off, Chris, with, I remember a conversation I had with you several years ago, and I don't know if you folks remember, do you remember the thing on maybe the 11 o'clock news where you first heard there was going to be, the world was going to go to ethanol, and we were going to have corn be our fuel of the future.
How'd that work out for you?
Not so good, but we did see that Brazil was doing, I think it was sugar cane.
Oh, yeah, but they have a large crop of sugarcane and much more than they ever need or could export.
Okay.
So what they did was they changed over 100% to ethanol. They run totally on ethanol. They don't run gasoline. There's some gasoline in Brazil, but not that much, which is really bizarre because they're drilling offshore right now.
That's true.
With our money, oddly enough. But so they're moving to 100% ethanol, and it's worked really well for them because they can do it. They can do it cheaply, and they can do it out of sugar, which is really it is a food staple, but it is not a major food staple.
Right.
You can live without it.
When we heard and saw this, then we all thought, well, we've got, what is our major crop? We've got corn, so we could make ethanol too,
Yeah.
and America could be independent with corn fuels and ethanol, and the world all got investors, and we had ethanol plants built in the Midwest, and then they got it in our gas. What happened, Chris?
It was the first Solyndra.
Yeah.
It was a lot of money pushed into things that weren't ready to go. Corn, if you really want a good idea of what happened to corn and what the problem was, take a look at food prices. Before fuel prices started to go up, food prices were already going up. And then think of the Arab Spring, especially in Egypt, what happened there. That had nothing really to do with dissatisfaction with Mubarak. I mean, granted, they were really dissatisfied, and I don't blame them.
Sure.
But they didn't go into the streets until food prices started going up. And why did the food prices start going up so high in the Arab world? Because we were making more ethanol out of corn and not sending it over in our balance of trade payments and such like that. We actually caused the riots in the Arab world because we wanted ethanol, and we didn't even want it. It was being forced on us by the government.
So we were taking a foodstuff that we had.
Absolutely, and we should. You never turn foodstuffs into fuel.
Right, and we had a very good export market for this, and now people would say, well, you know, we pay farm subsidies to not grow things, and here was we better utilize our land mass and our farming to make all this ethanol. It got into our fuel. Now we have 15%.
Right.
Okay.
Well, 10% now going to 15%, and 15% is a problem for a lot of cars out there.
Right. There's a point of no return because of some kind of moisture retention.
Yeah, it's hygroscopic. It holds the water.
Okay.
In fact, that's why you can't put ethanol in a pipeline and send it across the country, because it will take in so much water that by the time it gets to the other end of the pipeline, if it went across country, it would be 50% water, 50% alcohol.
Wow.
And it's like great if you're trying to make grain alcohol or something, but
if you're a moonshiner, you love
exactly.
it.
But it's a really stupid thing, and it also eats the seals in cars that are not ready for it. They have to have completely different seals in the fuel system. If you don't have them, you'll go out to start your car one day and go, hey, funny, it doesn't work.
Yeah, especially us in Detroit, or any from the states that are a little bit above the freeze belt. Moisture in the fuel doesn't mix when you get it
Right,
real
like
low.
you used to hear about diesel in the 70s, when you would get the water in the diesel because they were not really pumping it correctly, or they wouldn't get the water out of the fuel tanks.
Right,
and
and
you know the old thing, you never fill your car up after the tanker truck's been there.
I heard that.
Well, not just because of the sediment, but because of the water way back when. Well, that's still a problem with ethanol, and it will freeze in the line, and it's all sorts of problems.
Same issue.
Yeah, absolutely.
So, folks, so we had this ethanol discussion a while back. We talked about, you know, this is the fuel of the future, and it turned out it was just a little piece of the puzzle. It was kind of forced upon us. It really wasn't something that we were ready to, the technology wasn't there. Unlike gasoline, when it came into the market, when the cars went from early electrics to gasoline cars, where you bought your gasoline at a pharmacy.
Well, but people forget that early gasoline wasn't actually gasoline. It was more naphtha than it was anything else.
Right,
and it was not refined anywhere near to what we have today.
We bought it at a pharmacy in a jug.
Absolutely.
And we had, and the market, because of the popularity of these types of cars, the sell more of this. We need to do more of this. And the market drove the investment in the infrastructure to build our gasoline-powered transportation system, not a government mandate or forced investment from some kind of a do-well group who, you know, thinks they're going to save the world with a different fuel. So ethanol is out there. It's on the shelf. It's proven. It's really not the answer
and we can
for
make
us.
it. We can still make it work. And there is no reason, if we can get switchgrass and everything else to work, that we can take. Basically, when you cut your lawn, you'd be taking all of that, putting it into an ethanol fuel system, and that would eventually be turned into the fuel. But we're not there yet.
No.
And we're far away from it. But it is, in many ways, a very good gateway to eventually getting off of oil. But truthfully, getting off of oil is about 150 to 200 years in the future.
Yeah, and when you hear things on television that say oil is the fuel of the past, unfortunately that's really not quite accurate for people that really know the industry. And we've gone from something like ethanol, which is a toe in the water, which kind of proven you can't really legislate the technology. You can't legislate invention. You have to invent. No, you have to actually invent it.
Darn.
All right, so that brings us to one that we've tried, to one that we have a new toe in the water, and the one that's kind of the new glory child is compressed natural gas. CNG is the big talk of the town. Why? Because the U.S. has so many reserves
500 years worth of it.
of natural gas.
Right.
So what, Chris, are the issues with CNG?
Okay. Biggest problem with CNG right now is you can buy a CNG Honda Civic at the moment. You can go out and get it, and you can run about 100 miles on it. You better be somewhere near a place that can refuel you, which are not too often. Oddly enough, Myers, a lot of the Myers stores have CNG refueling stations.
Wow.
But they don't have a fuel tank like you know a fuel tank. It is round, about yay big, about that long,
Right.
and it is under high pressure. And so that tank is made out of what they call pultrusions. It's a steel tank with a fiberglass and plastic mesh over it that's pultruded over it and sealed tight, so that those outer forces or inner forces don't cause it to explode
blow the
or
thing apart.
buckle.
Yeah.
So it doesn't hold that much energy in it, and that's the problem that everybody keeps looking at. If you were going to move to CNG eventually, if we were to let's say we went CNG all the way,
Right.
eventually your car, you would have the whole floorboard built off of those tanks.
Oh my goodness.
So it'd be tank, front
Right.
to back. Great, wonderful, but that's a completely different way of building a vehicle than we know now,
Right.
number one. And it would cause its own problems in its own way, because now you would have all of these tanks, and let's say you have an accident, not that cars ever get into
No,
accidents.
that never happens.
Well, now you have high pressure CNG coming out from wherever
Wherever it's
maybe
impacted.
multiple places.
Yeah.
All it needs is one spark, boom, you go. Funny thing about that you always see in the movies is a car gets in an accident, you just tap it, bing, it explodes. Really unlikely.
Yeah.
It's very rare when cars start on fire in accidents.
You guys have seen it on the Hollywood movies all the time. The car goes over the cliff, and boom, there's this giant.
Funny how it always explodes before it really hits something.
How does that happen?
It's because somebody up there with a radio control.
I think the operative word here is compressed. It's
Highly compressed.
And for us to, when you think about your your barbecue, when you go get your propane refilled. You know, the tanks that they're heavy. When you have compressed natural gas, it has to be very strong.
Very much so. And in fact, I once had an engineer at one of the car companies tell me that it's the perfect fuel for people who have bladder control problems, which I thought was a hilarious thing to say.
Why is that?
And I said, you know, why is that a problem? He says, because you have to stop so often. You're going to, you know.
The range.
Exactly. The range is
so here we have a fuel, Chris, that we have plenty of in the United States. There's lots of natural gas. That, again, we can't legislate technology. We can't try to invent the invention.
But we can do things with natural gas that people aren't paying attention to. Natural gas and coal can both, if need be turned into gasoline and diesel.
Right.
It's what the Germans had to do during World War II. It's called the Fischer-Tropsch process. And you turn these entities into a fuel that can be used in a combustion engine.
It's carbon-based fuel. You turn
Absolutely, and it's very easy to do it. But we will probably not even have to do that, because now we're starting to look into things like being able to pull the CO2 right out of the air and turning it back into gasoline.
It's amazing. So it is a technology we want to talk about. We know that it's out there when you talk about alternative fuels. The other one that I think is really out there, Chris, and I've been involved with it, and you and I have been seeing these things for years. I've gone to press events with these things there. It was kind of like outer space stuff.
Jetson stuff.
The Jetson stuff, but the fuel cell is an amazing invention. How come we're not driving around with them everywhere?
Probably because right now the hydrogen fuel cell costs about $100,000 each.
Oh, is that all?
Oh yeah.
Oh,
and the film, there's a polymer film that goes. It's between each side of the cell. To get the electricity out of it, you have to put the hydrogen through, and then it separates into oxygen and the hydrogen molecule. You're actually putting water through. And that little membrane is thinner than a human hair, and it for the longest time did not stand up to the rigors of being in a car. Yeah. You've got to have it stand up for a minimum of 150,000 miles.
Oh, yeah.
And when we first started the fuel cell process, which was, I mean, really started in the past 20 years, a fuel cell would have cost you about $2–3 million. We've gotten it down below 150,000. We're heading probably towards, let's say $70,000 in the next 3 years. Okay, fine. I can go to Ford Racing, for example, and I can order the new 5-liter V8 and the transmission right from Ford, and they're making a good profit off of this for $7,000.
That's right.
So I'm sorry, we got a ways to go here.
We got a long ways to go.
Now, that's not to say the fuel cells don't make sense. What everybody's missing, though, is that the electric vehicles today, whether they're hybrids or full EVs, are really pointing the way towards the fuel cell vehicle, because you'll be using the fuel cell much as the Volt is now using its combustion engine to keep it running.
Correct.
Instead of having that combustion engine, you'll have a fuel cell there that's going to be fed by hydrogen, most likely, although we could do it right now with gasoline, with methanol, with any other fuel.
Or CNG.
Absolutely, but the reason nobody wants to do that is because, well, you know, that pollutes. But the amount that it pollutes is so much less than what you are used to that is the perfect becoming the enemy of the good. And in many ways it is.
Well, I think that's a really huge point. We have to stop right there to talk about it, because when you talk about Earth Day, when we talk about the auto industry, you really have to start thinking about what the auto industry has done in the last 30 years to clean itself up. And when you talk about tailpipe emissions from 1965 to tailpipe emissions today, 99% cleaner than they were just those 30, 40 years ago, to the point where you could just about put your mouth on a tailpipe and breathe out of it. And the clean air that we're getting out of these cars today are to the point where it's almost silly for us to keep chasing the car as the culprit behind our air problems and our fuel issue problems. We're actually using less of our natural resources to power our transportation than we are and heat our homes and our businesses. Our homes and our buildings and our businesses are far less efficient than our automobiles. So to chase after the 30-cent solution with the car when you have a 70-cent problem in your buildings is kind of crazy. So we have to kind of prioritize, where do we chase after saving Mother Earth, and where is the real energy problem?
There's an even bigger problem. It's all the handheld electronics we have now. It takes more energy to charge your iPhone than it does to run your car when you really get down to it. That in what you are getting in terms of energy out versus energy in. The iPhone, the iPad, any of those electronic devices, not to pick on Apple, are so inefficient in terms of what they're using and how it is coming out in terms of what you're getting out of it, then you aren't getting in transportation now. It's absolutely insane, and yet we're going absolutely 100% towards all these electronic things that people are saying, well, you know, we can stay at home, we don't have to drive, we can do this, we can do that. You're still going to be using at least as much energy, if not more than you're using now. So where does it come from?
The virtual office is just, you know.
A virtual office doesn't exist.
It's
The boss always wants you there to make sure you're doing something.
Well, I mean, it's just that we think that when we think of the auto industry, it's been the villain. The
Oh, it's always been the villain, but this, you know, there's a reason it's a villain. The reason it's a villain is because every week the driver, whoever he is or she is going to have to go into the gas station and put fuel in it. They're going to have to deal with all the problems that come with having a car. And so that is front and center. They're familiar with that.
Right.
They don't see that electronic device in front of them as having all the externalities that cause all of these problems as they do with the car.
Nor the regulation, and I think that's an important
No,
thing.
absolutely not.
When you think about the car, it's
Most-
probably the most over-regulated
It is the most regulated product, bar none.
of anything that we buy.
Absolutely.
And yet, the funny thing is, why do we keep regulating to the point where I just recently saw that, thank goodness somebody came to their senses, we have to have rear cameras. We have to have all, you know, they keep adding the technology. And the point is, at what point does this now just cost yourself out of basic transportation? The idea of
It's coming very quickly. It's coming very, very quickly. In fact, I've got something here that I got from the Center for Automotive Research in Ann Arbor. I did a piece on what's going on my website. And they talked about the growth that we're looking at if everything stays as it is right now. And then they said, well, what happens if we go to 56 miles per gallon?
Right.
Well, they said, however, dramatic changes not determined by market forces, gee, I wonder who that'd be, in the price and or the performance or attributes of new motor vehicles could significantly alter the baseline for growth as well as the age of the U.S. motor vehicle fleet and annual sales of new products. Now this is the kicker. This could result in the loss of hundreds of thousands of U.S. manufacturing jobs and reduce the standard of living and personal mobility of millions of U.S. consumers. When you got down to the end of their study, they were saying that with all the knock-on effects that come from it, that if the government keeps pushing fuel economy higher than the market is asking for it, and the market is asking for it in terms of what they are buying,
right,
then we could lose 1 million jobs in the auto industry right off the top.
Yeah, again.
And take 6 million jobs right out of the GDP of America.
right.
What sense does this make?
When it comes to the earth, you have to understand what you can really afford to do in your lifetime. And I think when it comes to the auto industry, we've gone so far. And we're talking about these technologies and these alternate fuels, it shows that we have done a really great job and really driven by the billions of dollars in investment by American car companies in our own industry that's really been kind of given away to Asian car makers because they just got into the game late and were able to buy their way into these technologies. And I think that's an issue probably for a whole nother show, Chris, but when I want to get to, because we talked, and we did touch a little bit about hydrogen, because there were some people that said, we'll just replace hydrogen with gasoline, and the whole concept of, or the other way around, the whole concept of refueling. You know, we all think of...
Actually, Shell has worked that out. You can go to a hydrogen fuel-up facility in California. There are a number of them. And it's basically you plug it in, you lock it down, and off you go. It takes longer. It takes a bit longer. But again, same trouble as with CNG. You've got a huge mother of a tank sitting there.
Yeah.
Plus, hydrogen is the smallest molecule out there. So let's say you go to you've got to catch a flight out for a business meeting, and you park your car full tank, or even a half a tank, at the airport. You've got half a tank of hydrogen, let's say.
Okay.
You're gone for a week. You now have a quarter of a tank or less because of what has seeped out past the seal.
The molecule is so small.
The molecule is so small.
Right.
Now, granted, we will get our sealing better, but doing those things costs money.
Right.
And until we can get into volume with them, until we can bring the cost down over time, it's going to be something, as with all technologies in automotive, they're going to come in at the top end. You're going to see very expensive cars. BMW has been working with hydrogen for years, and probably the leader in hydrogen mobility right now. They've been working on it. So you're going to see a really high-end car, and then you can probably bet that 25 years afterwards, you'll be driving one.
That's well, and then not to even mention the whole discussion we've had before about how much energy it takes to manufacture hydrogen for distribution.
Yeah, because hydrogen is not a fuel.
No,
It is.
We
it
have
is,
to make
it is an energy receptacle. It is not a fuel in and of itself.
Right, so that's a whole other discussion, and we promise we will get to these kind of things in later shows. But before we wrap up this whole discussion about alternate fuels, there is a technology that we have right now. It's finally here, and we can say that like we were sitting here in 1910 and we're driving the Detroit Electric, because we had a great electric car industry. It was manufactured and invented here in Detroit by Detroiters. We put it out onto the marketplace, and America in 1910, 1912, 1915, 1920 decided, and they chose gasoline. And now here we are 100 years later, and we have electric cars in the market that are viable, affordable, they're
usable.
Their technology works,
Yes.
and yet they are not selling. Chris, when we talk about electric cars, I read all the time about when these things hit the market. We've had a show here on In a Heartbeat about Chevy's entry. We've talked about Nissan's Ford Focus is coming out with an all-electric. They're in the marketplace, but people are not embracing this technology. What is the issue of why don't we believe electricity is a good alternate way to get our mobility moving?
The American consumer isn't stupid. The American consumer knows that you can't just plug it in any wall socket and 2 minutes later be on your way. It takes 12 to 14 hours to plug a volt in to house current and get it charged overnight. You're still going to get about 36 miles on a good day just out of electricity. But at least you've got that gasoline motor to keep providing the electrical power later.
Correct.
You get the Focus EV, and you're going to get whatever Ford says it's going to get, and depending on how you drive it, of course, these cars are very, very finicky as to how you drive them.
Well, they're temperamental to both the input from the operator and the environment.
Well, exactly. If it's cold, it's going to be a lot less mileage. If you put your foot down and go, well, guess you're going to just watch that gauge go the other way.
Saw a guy at the Detroit Auto Show who was ranting about how great his Nissan Leaf was, and he said, I wouldn't buy a Chevy Volt because it's not a real electric, because it's got that gasoline engine. I have a real electric. And I said, well, in Detroit, and for the auto show, it's usually pretty cold. And I said, you know, if I had a choice to which one to drive back and forth today, I'd pick the Chevy Volt.
Yeah, because you know you get home. You know you get home.
All right, so okay, forget that part of it, Chris. Forget the discussion I want to bring in for this is we were told by our friendly legislatures that we would, if gas prices got to $3 or $4 or $5, we would really embrace electrics. We know that fuel in Europe is $9, $10. Electric cars available there, they're not selling over there either.
No.
Why are people just saying, you know what, for me, this doesn't work. It didn't work 100 years ago, and just because you have a legislative body or a government that tells you you will have to build these electric cars, does it mean they will sell?
No, they won't sell. They'll sell only because they're legislated to sell, and because there are all these incentives for the automakers to make and sell these cars. I mean, you're going to start to see in the next couple of years hybrid electric medium and heavy duty pickup trucks.
Wow.
Now that's going to be a kick in the head. And the only reason that they're building them is not because everybody's so bloody green. It has more to do with the fact that if for each one of those that they sell, they get to factor in 2 of their gasoline-fueled vehicles.
Perfect.
And they can say, oh, we didn't build those 2.
Right.
And so that their cafe stays high.
Which is a game the Korean makers play when they say we're the most fuel-efficient car brand in the world. Well, you don't make any full-size V8 pickups. So
exactly.
Of course you don't have all the products. I really think this is an interesting study on how we talked about building electrics and how this was a great idea, and the technology, we finally got the technology.
It's a great technology, and they're fun to drive. They're actually very nice cars. I enjoy them tremendously. But the problem is that people are looking at them and saying, I'm having to pay this cost delta to get this. Now granted, there's a new member on the market that sort of turned this upside down, and that's the Prius C, the little Prius. That gets about 53 miles per gallon equivalent in the city, and it costs about $19,000. Okay, great, but it's a Yaris underneath.
Yeah,
the Yaris is about, what, $14,000, 15?
Yeah, and it drives like a $14,000 car.
Exactly. The Prius C is a nice little car. They're selling the daylights out of them because right now Costs are so high, people are going in and saying, you know what, I can live with this. And you can, but they're not buying the other myriad hybrids out there because the cost delta is high enough that the payback doesn't come back for 10 to 15 years in some cases.
Chris, that's a huge issue, and it's not just the initial cost of the car. It was when you buy a car, it is a financial decision, because first the car has to work for you, but second of all, there is a cost associated with driving that car, and you're either willing to pay for it or you're not. And what you can't do is you can't force someone, it's like when the whole healthcare, you can't force someone to pay money that they really can't afford. You're taking the choice out of their hands. And I think when it comes to, we talked about hybrids before. You're buying two powertrains.
And you're dragging them around with you all the time.
And it'll take years for you to get that money back.
Right.
The question is that worth your investment? Because really, when it comes to dollars and cents, that's the bottom line. That's the decision you need to make.
Well, yeah. And you also have to look at the long-term ownership of this thing, and you get past the 8 to 10 years. And granted, the battery packs have been lasting a bit longer than everybody expected, but let's say 10 years. You're the second or third owner of this car, and you're now looking at, I'm going to have to spend about $8,000 to $16,000 to replace these batteries. I'm sorry, what?
Yeah. Time for a trade-in.
I didn't sign up for this.
Time for a trade-in.
Exactly.
All right. Well, I think in that whole discussion, and then there's another discussion about the rare earth metals that are inside these vehicles.
And that China is now saying you can't have.
You can't have. It's a whole other discussion. But I think today we've covered all these topics for you. We've talked about the kinds of things that are in the environment and that are in the discussions. And when you talk about the earth and the automotive industry and all the things we've done to try to make mobility a smarter thing, I think you can now make a better decision. Chris, I know you're going to have more of this on the virtualdriver.com.
Absolutely. We've covered it quite intensively on this.
And as we should. I think this is the kind of where the old day of just blogging about a car review, sometimes you got to go a little bit deeper, understand all the factors that are at play, and it's not just everything you see and hear on television. You know, Chris, I know it's hard to believe, but we're out of time. But what I know,
wow, that went fast.
I know we have a lot of fun. But for the people that are looking out there for Earth Day, I think when you talk about the auto industry, we've done a pretty darn good job, haven't we?
We've done a heck of a job, and the cars are only going to get cleaner, and they're going to get much more fuel efficient, and they're still going to run on gasoline and diesel, and you're going to be surprised.
And thank goodness they're as safe as they are and as good as they are.
Absolutely.
Thanks again for coming in.
You're welcome, John.
Folks, I hope that information was good for you, and I know it's good for Mother Earth that we're always testing technology. You know, remember that America, necessity is the mother of invention, and we will find this invention to get through this crisis. And in the meantime, keep driving, enjoying it, and remember, knowledge is power. I'm your host, John Clor, and thanks for watching.